YouTube! It's Becky from Becky Writes, this is Becky Reads, and this is my March wrap-up video. It may not be morning now that I'm uploading it, but it's morning when I'm filming it, and I'm drinking my coffee, and I have 12 books to get through in the month of March, which is double what I thought I was going to be reading this month. A lot of that has to do with I just needed to take a break from writing. I had a funeral at the beginning of the month, so instead of writing, because I just didn't feel very creative, I read a bunch. And that's not a bad thing. I read a lot of really good stuff. So let's dive in. The first book that I finished this month was an audiobook, and that is The Achievement Habit by Bernard Roth. Bernard Roth is a professor at Stanford, and I live pretty close to Stanford, and he has worked with what is called the D School. It's an innovation school for entrepreneurs, engineers, basically people who want to think creatively. I gave this 2.5 out of 5 stars. I've read a lot of self-improvement books over the years. Some of them have some really great insights. This one felt kind of like a rehash of everything I've already read. I think that this might be really helpful if you are a professor, because so much of what he talks about is how he designs classes for people. Maybe if you're an entrepreneur, you might get something out of it, but I just thought it was kind of ho-hum, so meh. The second book that I finished this month was Lincoln and the Bardo by George Saunders. Now, I've done a spoiler-free review of this, which I will make sure is linked down below and on the screen. This was a 5 out of 5 star read for me. It was a strange book. It was not a book that I normally would reach for. This fulfills my TBR Jar challenge for the month, which is to pick up a book I don't normally reach for. And it was a strange little book. Basically, this follows one night that Abraham Lincoln goes to visit his son Willie, who has died from fevers, to visit the body before the body is buried, and the observations of all the people who live in the graveyard. I thought this was a strange book, but I really loved it, and the writing is fantastic, and again, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read the audiobook The Throne of Jade by Naomi Novik. This is the second in the Temeraire series. I enjoyed this, but I can't say that I adored it. The thing about this series that I have found is that it's quite subtle and it's not a lot of action. It's definitely more motivated by character development. For those of you who don't know anything about the Temeraire series, it is basically a retelling of the Napoleonic Wars with dragons. Dragons make up an aerial corps, and Captain Will Lawrence is yoked to a dragon named Temeraire, but Temeraire is a celestial. He is a Chinese dragon. At the start of this book, a Chinese ambassador has arrived to say they want Temeraire back. So as a compromise, Will and Temeraire go to China, and they have misadventures on the sea voyage there, misadventures in China. What I liked about this book was that we saw a deepening of the relationship between Lawrence and Temeraire. We see more of Temeraire as a thinking creature, and you see Lawrence begin to recognize that dragons aren't just beasts of burden, and there's a really good conversation about slavery, actually, and actually looking at the slave trade of humans and the treatment of dragons. And I think this idea of enslavement and that as a metaphor for greater social commentary is going to be something I hope that we see run throughout the rest of the books in the series. I think there are 4 or 5 more in the series, so I'm really curious as to how all of that is going to play out. Another thing I really liked about this is that we saw the humanity of Temeraire. We saw him reacting to other dragons who are seen as scholars, and him thinking of himself as a warrior versus a scholar and things like that. On the other hand, it was a much slower book even in the first one. There's a lot of time of them just sort of hanging out at sea. I enjoyed them, but they were lulls. I was never aching to pick it up. I never had to rush to finish. It was just a very gentle read. That's not a bad thing. It's just a very different thing, particularly for fantasy books. I had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to give this. I ended up with a 3.75 stars because there was just not the right pacing for me, but it was still good. I am going to continue with this series, so hopefully I'll read another one next month and let you know how it picks up. I then read 2 books from the same series. I didn't actually read them back to back, but I'm going to talk about them together. And the first one is The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. The second one is The Girl Who Fell Beneath Fairyland and Led the Revels There. These are both by Catherynne and Valente. This series is really a blend of The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. It's that kind of whimsical, strange, topsy-turvy story of a child lost in a fairy realm. And it feels whimsical. It feels kind of Dr. Seussy. It feels very much like the inheritor of the Alice in Wonderland series. You can imagine the Jabberwock, and you can imagine the Mad Hatter in this world. Now, I really enjoyed the first book in the series. It took me a solid halfway through this book to decide that I was invested, to decide I could accept the weirdness of this world, because it is. It's a very odd, strange, world and writing style, and I would not say that everyone would enjoy this. If you don't like whimsy, you won't enjoy this book. But if you like whimsy, and if you have read Alice in Wonderland and enjoyed it, or you like something that is almost theater of the absurd but not quite, this might be something you enjoy. The story of these books is that there's a young girl named September from Omaha, Nebraska, who is whisked away to Fairyland and has adventures. This is her first encounter in Fairyland, and this is her second encounter. So I gave the first one 4 out of 5 stars, and again, I enjoyed it once I got about halfway through and I decided to commit to the weirdness and the strangeness and the ridiculousness of the story. Then I started the second one, and I had a long break between getting about halfway through and finishing, and I just never had any impulse to pick this up. I honestly had to sit down on the last day of March and finish it so that I could wrap it up in this month, because I didn't want to have to wrap it up next month, and I just didn't, I don't know, I didn't love it. Now, I did give it 3 out of 5 stars rather than a 2.5 because I feel that if I had sat down and just read it all the way through, I would have enjoyed it. But this is a world where you have to be in it. It's too weird to kind of pick up and put down. This one I just didn't feel like had nearly as much cohesion. Not that there's a lot of cohesion in this one, because again, it's an Alice in Wonderland style kind of trippy, weird world. I do like September. There are some interesting plot twists that happen in this one. I thought the ending was ridiculous and made no sense to me. Like, I don't know if I missed something that happened, but the ending made 0 sense to me. So again, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I was trying to be more generous because I really enjoyed the first half. It was the second half that I kind of got things fell apart for me. This month I also read a couple of hobby books. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. The first one that I read was The City Homesteader by Scott Mayer. I gave it 3.5 stars. This is a great little introduction if you've never thought about city homesteading or urban gardening or whatever. This is a good little introduction. It's easy to read, it's easy to get through. It's a nice little reference book. The second of the hobby books I read was The Backyard Homesteader. This is edited by Kathleen Madigan. As you can see, I have a bunch of tabs. I enjoyed this so much that although this is a library copy, I purchased my own because I am trash. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. As far as a reference book, if you were interested in urban gardening, if you were interested in small scale food production, and I'm not talking about having a farm, I'm talking about like growing your own tomatoes and like if you want to have backyard chickens and things like that, this book is the best single resource that covers everything. It covers everything from like how to do container gardens and how to do raised bed gardens and what kind of soil corn needs to how to do backyard chickens or how to make your own cheese or whatever. It has everything. I know that a lot of you guys are probably not interested in it, but for like the one person out there who cares, this was a 5 out of 5 stars and I really liked it. Then I read a bunch of audiobooks, all in one series. Now my plan was not to finish this whole series this month, but I read the first one, I enjoyed it so much, and you guys know that I love a good marathon, and I read the entire Heroes of Olympus series by Riordan. The first book is The Lost Hero, and I gave it 4.5 stars. The second book is The Son of Neptune, and I gave it 4 stars. The third book is The Mark of Athena, and I gave it 4 stars. The fourth book is The House of Hades, and I gave it 4 stars. And the final book is The Blood of Olympus, and I also gave it 4 stars. Overall, the Heroes of Olympus series by Riordan is a 4-star read for me. It was a much more sophisticated plotline than the Percy Jackson books, so if you've read a couple of the Percy Jackson books and you felt that they were a little bit too juvenile, this series is a lot better in my opinion. The biggest difference is really that it is multiple POV, so we get to see lots of different perspectives. The characters are a little bit older, although I would definitely still classify this as a middle grade and not a YA. This series follows the events that happen in the Percy Jackson books, but they expand them. Basically, we open the first book with 3 new characters, one of whom has no memory of what's happened. All he knows is that his name is Jason. He's with what you discover are some half-bloods, and he too is a half-blood. The second book follows Percy, who's in the same predicament where he wakes up and has no memory, only that his name is Percy and he remembers Annabelle, but nothing else. And he discovers who those other half-bloods are, and they have to learn to work together to fight the big bad. I'm not going to go into any more detail because, again, I don't want to spoil the series for you, but I just felt that this was more sophisticated and I enjoyed it so much. Of course, I raced through this entire series in a month, really in like a week and a half. I read the entire series. I did listen to them on audiobooks. I enjoyed the audiobook narrators. One word of caution if you're audiobook snobs like me, the narrator for the first 3 books is fantastic, but they switch with The House of Hades and Blood of Olympus. They've changed to a different narrator. Another critique I have is really that these books are long. Every single one of them is over 500 pages, and for middle grade books, that is ridiculous. One of the things I kept thinking was these books should be about 75 pages slimmer. Every single one of them, except maybe the first one, which didn't feel long to me, even though it's one of the longer ones. The rest of the books just felt like there were scenes that were tedious, that a good editor would have asked Rick Riordan to slim down. Another thing that might be a critique but also a compliment is that Rick Riordan is doing a lot more to be diverse. Percy Jackson books are like all white practically. These books are intentionally much more diverse. We have a Native American character, a Latino character, a Black character, and an Asian character. We also discover that a character is gay, and there is an intentional desire to be diverse that you can really see in the series. It's just that about in the third or fourth book you start to feel like Rick Riordan just has a checklist of, okay, this diversity box is checked, this diversity box is checked, and that can get a little bit tiresome. But all in all, I really enjoyed the Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan. I do plan on reading the Magnus Chase books and the Trials of Olympus books, so hopefully I will start those next month. There you have it, guys. It's the 12 books that I read in the month of March. Comment down below and let me know what your favorite book of the month was. I think my favorite book as far as reading experience goes was probably The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan. I just really enjoyed getting back into that world, even though it wasn't the best book I read. Does that make sense? Sometimes your favorite isn't always the best. I hope you guys are all doing well, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!